Welcome to the AI Chat Podcast. I'm your host, Jaden Schaefer. Today on the podcast, we have the pleasure of being joined by Conor Grennan, who is the Dean of MBA and Graduate Students at NYU Stern and the head of Generative AI at Stern. So he is a New York Times bestselling author. Conor is actually someone I've been following on LinkedIn for a long time. We've chatted back and forth about AI things. He's always posting AI stuff, and he has over 46,000 LinkedIn followers. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in AI, if you're on LinkedIn, you got to give Conor a follow. I'll leave a link in the show notes to that. But I really think he kind of offers a unique lens on the ethical and future implications of artificial intelligence, everything that's happened. He brings you the breaking news. Welcome to the show today, Conor.
Jaden, so fun to be here. I've been listening to you since the very beginning. I've been learning a ton, so thanks for having me.
Super excited to have you on. So, dude, just starting this thing off, tell us a little bit about your background, like what got you into that. You're like an AI influencer, but when I go to LinkedIn, it says like top voice for public speaking. So obviously you've been doing things before this. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
I was literally telling somebody the other day, like, oh yeah, way back in the beginning, they're like, you mean like 4 months ago? I was like, yeah, 4 months ago. So yeah, my background is sort of funny, right? Because it's my wife that's in AI. She's in AI at McKinsey, and I don't have a background in AI. I have a background in communications and podcasting, writing, and all that. But back in January, February, she was like, "Hey, have you tried ChatGPT? You got to try this." And I was like, "Okay." So I tried it, and I was like you, right? When you had the original podcast back in the day, right? Again, 10 months ago. I was like, this is unbelievable. It's going to change everything. And I'm in academia, as you mentioned. I'm at the MBA program at NYU Stern. And I was like, okay, so I got to, we're in business school. What do? We like build frameworks. We love frameworks. So I built a framework to teach our MBA students. I'm thinking this is going to be important. And then I reached out to all these, heads of, industry in New York because we have connections. I was like, hey, how are you using this? So because I'm trying to teach our students. And they're like, oh, well, this won't surprise you, Jaden, right? They're like, well, we're not really using it, right? I was like, oh, okay, because it's,
Have you ever wanted to start your own podcast? I record and publish podcasts on a platform called Spotify for Podcasters, and I absolutely love it. Essentially, you can upload from your phone or computer, and it distributes to every platform that plays podcasts. They support video podcasts, and you can make money on the platform with ads or even podcast subscriptions, something that has made my life so much easier as a podcaster. So if you're interested, I highly recommend you give it a try. You can download the Spotify for Podcast app, or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started on your podcast today.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Pretty useful. And they're like, well, how are you using it, right? And I was like, well, I'm using it like 50 times a day. And they're like, well, could you teach us? I was like, okay. So I came over and taught them. And this is the great part. So I was teaching them how to use it. And I would train them for like an hour on generative AI. And they were like, this is going to change everything, right? This is like hedge funds and things. And I walked away and I was like, Conor, you are the greatest teacher in the history of teaching. And, and then like I would check in with them like a week later and they'd be like, oh, we're not really using it. I was like, okay, I'm really bad at this. So I had to sort of like take it all back, and it made me like totally rework the framework, how I thought about this. But that's kind of how I got started in it.
That is awesome. So this was the beginning of the year. You kind of start, going out on a limb teaching this. And, if I remember correctly, you've created some courses around this since. So walk us through like the year, some of the highlights, what you've been working on in AI and some of the things you've been doing. You've been doing some cool stuff.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, like I feel like we've all been kind of like learning together, right? I mean, I feel like you've been at the forefront of this, and all of us are, all of us, right? There's a lot of people obviously out there doing this, but it's all like, hey, what are you learning? What are you figuring out? I think, one of the things that I hear you talking about that I talk about a lot too is like, how do you get people like using this? Because it's a really weird thing, right? It's like on one level, it is the simplest thing that anybody has ever used in human history, because the only sort of skill that you need is like being able to talk like a human, which you're good at, I'm good at, humans are great at. Yeah. And yet it's really, really hard to use, right? So I ended up, as I was sort of saying, I kind of like took this framework back to kind of like the lab to re-examine it. So, I mean, listen, since then I've now been, training corporations on how to do this, large corporations. I'm doing like LinkedIn.
You did our LinkedIn course or something. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm doing a LinkedIn learning course on AI for business that's coming out this fall. I'm doing, Chief Executive Media has this phenomenal series that I help lead on generative AI. That's been really fun. But it was really sort of, at the essence of it was rethinking that core value prospect of like, how do people learn this? And I mean, just to sort of give you a little glimpse, like for me, it was, look, the tool is really, especially when GPT-4 came out, right? It's like, that was really powerful. I remember you sort of like early on, you're like, holy cow, if you haven't tried this, you have to try it, and so we tried that. And I was like, okay, if this is really powerful, then the only other thing in the equation is the human, right? So I was like, so there must be something wrong with us. And so I have a bit of a background in coaching, and coaching does a lot of like neuroscience and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to, people who know about this stuff a lot better than me. And they said something really cool that I didn't forget, which was, they were like, well, Conor, imagine you're trying to like get two people in shape, right? And like, one person you give like this state-of-the-art gym to, and the other person you give like a personal trainer. Okay. Now we know that the person with the personal trainer will get better and, in shape better, but like, for sure, why is that, right? It's because like the brain, like it's about behavior. It's not about the tool. Otherwise, like, look, I bought a treadmill, man, and I'm thinking like, oh, it's gonna look amazing. Here comes the summer. And I did it once. And I'm like, that's enough of that. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not behavior. So that's what kind of got me thinking in a new way about it.
Okay. Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. And I think, of course, you got to implement it to get the value out of it. Something I would love to ask you about, you mentioned a little bit about like your framework that you kind of built around. Talk to us about your framework. Talk to us maybe about some key takeaways of, people interested in really diving into this. How can they use this more? But yeah, tell us about your framework.
Yeah, thanks. So it's, and I hear like sort of like, again, like all of us trying to like, what is it here, right? So first, I think that getting into the framework, I think the first thing you need to understand, or one would need to understand, is like, why is it sort of like hard to keep on using, right? And I sort of, in my sort of deep dive in the research and all that kind of stuff, it turned out that like, it's how and by the way, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I talk to a lot of them, and like, it's how the brain sees things, right? So the brain is great at like pattern prediction, automation, things like that. So when it sees something like ChatGPT, it has no framework. So it goes straight to like Google, which, as you know really well, right? If you use it like Google, it's terrible, right? Because it's a great, reasoning tool, but it's not a good knowledge tool. It's a little better now, obviously, with, being sort of integrated into the internet for the first time. But you have to understand why the brain is like resisting this. And why is it when you say the best thing you could possibly do is talk to it like a human? Why is that hard? Well, it's hard because it's hard to talk to a baby like a college professor. Like, it's not a human. And so I think what I sort of like started to realize, as I did a terrible job early on and then got better at it, was essentially that, I was training sort of, C-suite leaders and everything to do this, and to learn the tool and everything. And then what I switched to when I switched to the framework is, forget the tool, just like, how do you work, right? So I built this kind of like 3-part framework, like a learn, execute, strategize framework, but not around how the tool works, but rather around how you work, right? So it's like, well, look, you're learning things, you're making decisions, you're communicating, and it kind of went really deep into that, and then saying, okay, at all those things, start applying them. And the other thing I would say on that is, I don't know if you saw Sam Altman's tweet from like a couple of weeks ago about like job loss and everything. And he's like, look, jobs can, remember that? He was like, jobs can be broken down into a series of tasks. And I was like, gosh, that's really a bright thing to say, right? So I started moving into that. I'm like, instead of thinking about your job as this monolithic thing, start thinking about it as a series of tasks. Because what I keep hearing, even from like the brilliant, I won't even name names, but the brilliant folks out there on this, is like, just practice. But I'm like, that's like saying like eat less and exercise, man. Like if we know eat less and exercise, but like, how do you practice? So instead I'm sort of like talking to people about like how to break down their day and their tasks.
I love that. Yeah, it's totally about breaking stuff down into tasks. Like people talk about like, oh, AI is gonna like take over podcasting and stuff, which, I mean, to be honest, if I didn't have to sit down and do podcasts, I'm sure I'd be fine. But I do enjoy it, so it's fun. But it's crazy the amount of tasks I automate in a day. Like, as you might know, like I produce an insane amount of podcasts. It's like 3 podcasts a day. Sometimes a bunch of crap happens, it's like 4 or 5. I've been known to put 10 out in a day when it was, just crazy. And like, that is like almost, it's funny because I talk to like, so for example, I've been talking to a bunch of companies lately because I'm like, hey, I produce all this content. I'd love for you to grab it, put it into social clips and like schedule it out for me. I know it would like help the podcast grow, but I don't have the time to really do this. And a lot of them are like looking at how much content I produce and they're like, yeah, sorry, that's like too much content. We don't really want to do that. And they're like, you're not a good customer or whatever. I'm like, okay, fine. So now I got to like go train someone to do it and just do it in-house, whatever. But the point being, there is no way I could create this amount of content and get my podcast to where I've gotten it to over the last year without like, you have no idea how much I use AI for every single task. So it's totally like what you said. I've broken my objectives and my job, you could say, into a series of tasks. And I have AI scaling a whole bunch of them. And, ultimately I'm going to have to hire actual people to help, but they're still going to be using the AI tools and my systems to kind of do all the scaling. But yeah, at the end of the day, when people are like, I don't know, the pros and cons of AI, it's like at the end of the day, every person can find a handful of AI tools and you can immediately produce about 10 times as much output, whatever that looks like for your job, 5, 10x your output. And in other words, like your growth, your revenue at your company, whatever that is that you're measuring, totally can be scaled. And then just look at it like, what are the parts that you love? What are the parts that AI is not good at? Those are the things you focus on. But if AI can do something, like just let it do it and save yourself a ton of time. I'm sure you give that advice all the time.
So that's so right, Jane. But here's what I love about what you just said is that like, people ask all the time, I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, like what companies are doing this well? And the honest answer is I don't really see a lot of companies really doing this well. And I thought about that a lot. And it's like, right, because companies are made up of people. Do you know what I mean? But and those people, they kind of want to come to work and they want to go home. And but when I do see people doing it really well, the people I sort of reference are people like you, right? I'm like, even though, I hadn't sort of like gotten that little dive into what you just did, but it's people who have so much to do, small startups, less than 20 people typically, are just like, sometimes nonprofits too, like they just like have way too much to do. And they're like, okay, this is like survival mode for me right now. What I love about that too, and why it's so hard to do use cases, like I'll go into a big healthcare organization or a marketing, whatever, and people say like, well, or private equity, I do a lot with private equity. And they'll say like, well, how do you use this with, healthcare? I'm like, you're going to tell me how you use it with healthcare. Because anytime I start to throw out use cases, you just gave a phenomenal use case that's applicable to almost nobody unless you're doing this, right? So I kind of think of it like electricity, right? So like if you went back in time before the light bulb, right? And you brought back the light bulb to people, right? And they would be like, this is unbelievable, right? Like they would know exactly now I can do X, Y, and Z, all that kind of stuff, right? And you'd be like, Jaden the God, right? And then let's say you kind of came back to this, time period. And then you went back like a month later, you're like, I have, something even better. And they'd be like, Jaden the Great, what is it? What do you have? And you'd be like, I have electricity. And they'd be like, that sounds incredible. How do you use that? And how do you answer? Right? The answer is like, well, what do you do? What do you like? It's like, if you need to heat your house, you heat your house. If you need to cool your house, essentially electricity is different for every person, but all electricity does is help. Like I could heat my house and cool my house without electricity. It just helps you do it faster, better quality, all that kind of more efficient, everything like that. But you can't just go in and start giving electricity use cases unless you know what people are doing. And generative AI is sort of like that because, things like we've been using AI forever, obviously, right? Like spell check. Like you don't use spell check for anything except spell checking. But now we've like ripped the user interface off AI and we're left with this generative AI and it's like electricity. Like how do you use it? Well, it depends on what you do,
Yeah. Oh no, I totally get that. Really not, it's difficult to find the exact use cases. It's like, look, I'll teach you how to use the tool. I'll teach you what tools and capabilities are out there, but you really got to be kind of creative. And I think it's, because it touches every industry and niche right now, the people that they can learn, they can take your coaching, they can listen to my podcast, whatever. They learn the knowledge and they figure out how it applies to their industry before anyone else in their industry does. Those people are going to be so much further ahead. There's a lot of opportunity right now for kind of that arbitrage and that delta where you really can find the gap and fill it with figuring out your own use cases. And it's kind of, honestly, it's kind of why I'm starting my new startup, AI Box. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yeah.
Essentially, we allow people to take their AI workflows and turn them into like tools, post them on a marketplace and monetize them. That's the concept. But the reason we came up with that is because when ChatGPT first came out, I was literally sitting there and my wife and I, we've done a couple software startups and we were thinking of like 10 new use cases every day. I'm like, oh my gosh, it'd be amazing to do like X, Y, and Z. We'd like chain together all these AI models and like all these prompts. We were thinking of like 10 of these a day. And it got to the point where I'm like, there's no way I can create all the ideas I have, number one. And number two, there's so many use cases out there that I will never be able to think of. I'll never be able to create. I'm not going to create like a company that just makes a million AI use cases. So we're like, we just need to build a platform and let the people do it, because the people know, they know what they're using AI for. They know what their workflows are in a way like I'll never know how a mechanic or a lawyer is using this to help craft a certain aspect of a contract or, yada, yada. But like these people do know. And there's so many incredible use cases I've been hearing since doing the podcast. I'm sure you hear a lot. But yeah, it kind of all came back to that.
No, and that's the thing about AI bots, which is I always hear you sort of like, pitching it a little bit in the beginning. I'm always like, that sounds actually really cool, because it's exactly what you're saying, right? Like workflow, everybody's workflow is utterly different. Even on one team, everybody's workflow is different. So like what I do when I'm like, training companies or something like that, like I'll do like a, half day workshop or something, right? Mm-hmm. And essentially like, I'll say, hey, listen, I need to sit with somebody to do a demo, because I can do a pretty good, compelling, generic demo that's interesting and all that kind of stuff. And I do it in keynote speeches, all that. You've probably seen this kind of thing, of course, a million times, and you've done it, I'm sure. But there's nothing like when I sit down with somebody and say, tell me what you do. And I'll be sort of like driving the car, so to speak. Like I'll be sort of like typing in, dude, I won't even know what they're saying. Do you know what I mean? Like they're giving me like acronyms. They're like, they start to explain. I'm like, don't tell me, don't worry. I'm just going to type it in. They start to explain something. I'm like, it's okay. Just put it in. And it reminds me every time of, even on the same team. This is why I love the AI bots idea about, individual workflows, and just use this, because that to me is the giant bottleneck. If you can just get people to sort of understand that, like, if you use this, look, if your company isn't incentivizing you, then just do it. You know what I mean? Like it saves 2 hours on your day and your quality of work is going to be better and you're going to be promoted. But that's why I try to work with senior leadership. It's like, because new benchmarks are now set, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or I'll work with individuals and say, listen, like you're going to get promoted out of this. There's almost no way around it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's no way, like if you really do dive in on AI, you're going to get promoted or your company's going to grow. So yeah, it's a no-brainer. Something I'd love to ask you about, Conor, is, so you're in this space, you're consulting, you're seeing these use cases. What are some of the most exciting use cases in AI that you see today? And then also, what are some of the most exciting ones that are coming down the pipe that you're forecasting that you're excited about?
Yeah, I think the most exciting, to be totally honest, is really the startup space, because I'm starting to see startups just doing this from the ground up, right? So one of the big things that I was even talking about today, so I think I posted this on LinkedIn recently, not sure when this will come out, but the point is like around like LLMs, like should you've had this conversation with a ton of really interesting people, like should you buy, should you build, like, OpenAI's enterprise, all that kind of stuff, right? But it's really interesting because people are building these and buying them and everything, thinking this is going to solve something, but it doesn't solve anything any more than, again, like putting a treadmill in your house is going to get you super fit. I mean, it's all about you and your behavior. And this is all about change management, right? So when I talk to companies, I'm like, this is not a digital transformation. I mean, look, there's tech stack aside. It's not a digital transformation. This is a change management thing, which C-suite tends to be really, really good at. It's kind of probably how they got to the C-suite. And so when I think about like the really exciting things happening, I think about really the startup world, because I mean, they're starting this from the ground up. They're reorging. I mean, again, one of the examples that I was giving in this idea about whether you should buy or build is that people are taking this technology and sort of slapping it onto like an old organizational structure where you're still hiring for administrative skills. I'm like, it's going to flatten the organization like crazy, right? I mean, you don't really have to hire for administrative skills anymore. You have to hire for critical thinking. And people would say, well, we've always done that. It's like, okay, well, I mean, have you really? I don't know. I mean, but point being that co-pilot with your entry-level person is going to, and I think, I'm sure you did. You saw it because you talked about it, like talking about that BCG study that, Ethan Mollick, Harvard, all that kind of, all those did. And it was like at the lower end, they improved by 47%. The upper end, I think, was 17%. Yeah, 47% increase in quality from your lower end people. That means that the quality of work going to your middle management is way, way better. So the exciting thing for me is really seeing the organizations that are really taking a look at how their organization is structured. Yeah. And then I think in the future, and you talk about this a ton, I do too, I love it, the healthcare implications. Yeah. Again, like, brain tumor stuff and everything else, but just like drug discovery, because it's so ripe for it. I was talking with a private equity place yesterday just about radiology and there was that incredible study where it's, it's like, in order of like who gets it best, or closest to right, it goes like AI, then humans, then AI plus humans, which must be some weird ego-driven, bizarro world thing. So there's a lot of weird stuff like that. But to me, like, just because of the actual implication of how it affects humans is the healthcare space. It's blowing up. I'm super excited to see what comes next there.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's so many insane use cases coming out. So something that I actually think about a lot is the fact that, of course, we're seeing like a shift to putting AI into everything right now. But I really think like probably first quarter next year, everything is going to go even crazier because we've had like a cycle where pretty much from the beginning of this year, like end of last year till next year, we'll have this full cycle where a ton of software companies and even large corporations will have had a full year to essentially implement, build out a lot of these AI tools. And so I think, right now, of course, there's lots of cool stuff's being integrated, but I think we're even just scratching the surface on like the current technology, like just ChatGPT being integrated into something or LLMs being integrated into something. There's so many, like you mentioned, startups that are going to be coming out with some really crazy innovation in the next, number of months that are finally kind of getting their products out of development and into the hands of everyone. We're seeing some, like, even myself, I'm really excited about like Air AI, I think it's called, where it's like the sales one where it literally can do like the full sales call chatting, just crazy.
Yeah, I saw that demo. Yeah, like it was like a Tesla demo or something like that.
Yeah, it sells a car or whatever. So super crazy. And I think the implications of that, like call centers, sales, customer support, like so much, it's going to be insane. One thing I'd love to ask you about as well is, so of course there's all these amazing use cases. What concerns do you have with AI? What are some maybe negatives, some drawbacks, or some things people should be aware of as well?
Yeah, the truth is it feels like, and I'd love to hear your answer on this too, like it almost like the things you feel, right? Like all the deep fakes and things like I don't know how you get around all the ethical stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not as concerned about, data privacy and things like that, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm sure I should be. I'll probably sound naive on that, but it's one of these things where they have to get right after the social media fiasco. I mean, Sam Altman has really hung his hat on that. I think they've put 20% of their net or something to alignment or something like that, right? I mean, like they've just invested really heavily in that. I think they'll get that right just because they have so much riding on it. And also you have different models that people could just jump to, right? I mean, I'm a big OpenAI guy, but like one thing that goes wrong with that, like, hey, Anthropic is over here saying blah, 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 or something goes wrong with Midjourney and, Adobe has hung their hat with, Getty Images and everybody else around hey, like companies will just say, well, look, if you're going to use one of these, use Adobe because we know that they don't, you're not going to have any copyright violations.
Yep.
I think they'll figure that out. I mean, I think that it's, they'll probably come to these, conclusions, these agreements with New York Times with, what I mean? Like just all that, right? With this all lawsuits. My big concern is around like the deep fake stuff. I mean, because now with, character AI is huge. I'm sure, you've seen all the meta stuff with the Tom Brady stuff and everything like that. Like that's all awesome, but it's also like, holy cow, with celebrities and everything else. But just like, and again, right now with, ChatGPT-4 Vision, it's at the moment, it's really good about, hey, I can't tell you what this is because it's a human face. That tech will probably get better even. But my God, can you imagine like the stalking implications? So it's a very human thing rather than the big like Gary Marcus, hey, this is going to, destroy the universe kind of thing. I'm not concerned about that stuff. I'm really concerned about like the very personal stuff.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Something that concerns me for sure with like that whole deepfake space. And I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but like, think of the implications of like in a trial, someone deep fakes like some like falsified evidence. Like that's insane, right? Like you could frame someone so easily. And I mean, like I swear all of the like evidence, and it's not just like a picture, it's like a video of them like, running around doing something bad, right? And I swear like all of that like security footage we see now is just like grainy anyway. So like they literally could have like, it's just crazy. So that definitely concerns me. I'm not sure like at what point, I'm sure they're going to have some really crazy like systems and processes in place for vetting, like evidence content now, right? Because if you show something to the jury of someone clearly doing something, it's kind of like a closed book. But like who's thinking about, oh, maybe this was just a completely fake thing, So anyways.
Yeah, AI forensics is going to be like the big, I mean, you think about it, like we used to do eyewitness testimony, and now we can't even, and now we're sort of in a whole new world. But I think you're right. I mean, I hadn't even thought of that. That's wild. Like, but yeah, this idea that, people will be experts in, I mean, obviously AI writing, I don't think there's really any way. Maybe in imaging, there'll be like some tell if you go deep enough in the pixels or something. I don't know. That's crazy. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, well, so I think what a lot of the AI image models are, some of them are doing and some of them are talking about it, but like they have like secret invisible watermarks, which is just like pixels that kind of are like in special places. And when they scan it, they can say, all they can do though is say like, we generated that image, like our model, but they don't have it for all the other models. And the other thing that I think about a lot is the fact that you can get like, let's say you get Midjourney or whatever the best model is to create something that looks like perfect and realistic, and sure, they have their watermark on it. But then you can also just throw it into, let's say, just like a bootlegged open source model with no security on it or anything, and say like, recreate this
image away.
Or just recreate this image as best as you can. And now the security's gone. So I think it's kind of this cat and mouse game. I don't really know what the solution is. Even OpenAI on their like AI text, detection, they gave up on that project after a handful of months because they're just like, well, we can't do it. Our accuracy rate was pretty bad. It was like 60 or 70%, right? Which you can't have all those false positives. So it's crazy. Something I would love to ask you about, Conor, as we're wrapping the show up today. What is one piece of advice you feel like you could give listeners, perhaps, people implementing AI into their companies, people looking at implementing AI into their companies, executive C-suite, all those kind of people, right? What's a piece of advice you feel like you could give them on AI and AI's implementation into their organizations?
Yeah, I'd say, some of the basic stuff, start small, practice, all that kind of stuff. But like, I don't know if that works, right? Because I'm trying to get as practical as possible. And so first of all, listen, I really do think training is just essential. I mean, I think that people need to sort of like hear from somebody who knows how to use this. How do you do it, right? Like, and what is it? Whether that's, from a big consulting company or small consultants, there's a lot of them. Obviously I do that. But really, like, what I tell people, if I can kind of get in their ears, is don't think of this as tech. Don't think of it as a digital. Think of this as change management. You are excellent, you C-suite person, at change management. Think of it like that. How do you change behavior? How do you change the learning? I was talking about in this one article about like, do you need like a chief AI officer? And I was saying it's more like a chief productivity or a chief learning officer. Do you know what I mean? Like, because all that does for the C-suite and for, kind of the VP level or whatever it is, it just does one thing, right? It allows them to see what the new benchmark should be. And then they have to take it from there, right? And then I think with, when people ask me to be totally honest, like sort of, at the non-P&L responsible kind of level, and people just be like, hey, how can I get better at this? Again, what I say is like, there's some great, like, you're one of 3 podcasts that I like always recommend. I'm like, look, it's just out there, right? In 10 minutes, you'll just hear sort of somebody talking about this thing that you're reading about, which is way different from reading about it. I think that, there's great people on LinkedIn. There's, the Ethan Mollets and Ali Millers and people like that of the world who I just like really like, soak up their stuff. So just go to somebody who you like their voice and you feel like they can explain it well, like those folks I just mentioned. And then just follow them. And then again, I don't want to say like, just practice. But what I would do is take your job and just take one day. Do me a favor. Just take one day, break your job into discrete tasks. Like write down, okay, right now I did this, and just throw ChatGPT at it. Just say, hey, this is what I'm doing. How can you help? Nothing more. I don't do prompt engineering or anything. I'm just like, just talk to it. And lastly on that, just sort of, if it's not answering it well, like, you wouldn't fire an intern after a day. Just like, so I don't say just practice with it, but do that. Take one task, throw it at it. If it's not working, try it a few more times and see, like at some point it's going to hit and you're going to be off and running.
Yeah. Love that. Incredible advice. Conor, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, sharing all your advice, everything you're doing. For listeners, like I mentioned, go and follow Conor on LinkedIn. And I guess, is there anywhere else that people can find you or find out what you're working on? What's a good way for, give me some plug, give me some stuff to put
Thanks for asking. Yeah, I like doing YouTubes just because it's fun. Like, I'm not a big YouTuber or anything like that, but like I love doing sort of like YouTube videos on this, LinkedIn and, and Twitter and stuff like that. Like, Jaden, I don't know how, like you were just talking about content, so I love that. Like I am working at getting a newsletter out that sort of like actually what I'm good at is like career coaching. I've done that for a decade, and just thinking about how to integrate generative AI into your career. I really want to do that because I'm a writer by trade. But I hear you, like the overwhelming amount of content that you and I are, I think, producing. People are like, okay, that's okay, chill out. But like, but anyway, I'm gonna, that's sort of like just what I'm doing. LinkedIn, YouTube, and stuff like that. But yeah, and again, continue listening to you, and I think I'm just learning a lot from you every day.
Very cool. Well, appreciate you coming on. I'll drop links in the description to that content, and people can go find you on LinkedIn and get, I'm sure you'll be sharing as you're coming out with all of that new exciting content and stuff. To the listener, thank you so much for tuning in to the AI Chat podcast. Make sure to rate us wherever you get your podcasts, and have a fantastic rest of your day.